So, what do you do when you hear a fire alarm or a tornado siren? If you're like me, you probably think you jump into action right away. But well, our brains have a funny way of dealing with crises. Let's get into a really fascinating and kind of scary cognitive bias called normalcy bias.
Right off the bat, we need to forget everything we've seen in Hollywood disaster movies. You know the scene. Everyone's screaming, running for their lives. According to author David McCraney, that's just not what happens. The reality is actually way more dangerous.
So, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If we're not panicking, what are we doing? The answer to this is a little unsettling, and it really explains why people get caught in situations they could have easily escaped.
Yeah, it turns out the most common human reaction isn't panic. It's a weird, eerie calm. It's this tendency to just downplay the threat. First responders have a name for it. They call it negative panic. And it's that quiet hesitation that can cost you everything.
And this brings us to the official term, normalcy bias. Basically, it's our brain's default setting. It just assumes that things are going to keep being normal, just like they were yesterday. It makes us look at a real threat and think, nah, that's not going to happen. Not to me. And here is the stat that should really make you sit up and pay attention. Research shows that a whopping 80% of people show this bias in a disaster. Let that sink in. That means 4 out of 5 of us are hardwired to just freeze when we really need to be moving. To really get a handle on this, it helps to look at its complete opposite. On one side, you have normalcy bias, which makes us underreact, but on the other, you have worst-case scenario bias, where people freak out over every little thing. The problem is, most of us fall squarely on the side of doing nothing. You've probably heard this called other things too. Analysis paralysis? That's when you're so overwhelmed you just can't make a decision. The ostrich effect. Yeah, that one's pretty obvious, right? Burying your head in the sand. And like we said, first responders call it negative panic. So why? Why does our brain do this to us? Why is its default setting so incredibly dangerous in an emergency? Well, it all comes down to the nuts and bolts of how our brain processes information, especially when we're stressed out. Think about this. Even on a good day, it takes your brain a solid 8 to 10 seconds to really understand something new. Now, throw in the adrenaline and chaos of a real crisis, and that processing time slows way, way down. Your brain is scrambling for what to do, and when it can't find a new plan, it just falls back on the old one. Everything's normal. Researcher Amanda Ripley breaks our reaction down into 3 phases. First up is denial. Our brain literally just rejects the idea that this horrible thing is really happening. Then we hit deliberation. This is where we try to figure out what to do. But if you don't already have a plan, you can get stuck here for a dangerously long time. And finally, you reach the decisive moment. That's the point of no return, where you have to act. And the stakes for getting through those phases quickly are, life and death. History is just littered with examples of this bias leading to absolute catastrophe. Let's take a look at what this looks like in the real world. Let's start with the Titanic. The ship was unsinkable, right? That one powerful idea was a classic case of normalcy bias. It's why there weren't enough lifeboats, and it's why so many passengers, at first, actually refused to get into them. They just couldn't believe the danger was real until it was way too late. Or think about something more recent like Hurricane Katrina. People had days of warnings, and they were getting more and more urgent. But thousands chose to stay put. Why? Because they'd been through other hurricanes, and they just assumed this would be the same. They minimized the threat because a storm that bad was completely outside their normal experience. And during the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center, many people didn't just run. Instead, they did something sociologists call milling. It's this strange behavior where people gather, they talk to each other, they make phone calls, all because their brain is desperately trying to confirm that this emergency is real enough to justify breaking from the norm. This number is just wild. A study found that 70% of the survivors from the Twin Towers talked to other people before they even started to leave. That milling we just talked about, it's not just about getting information. It's a powerful example of how we look to others for cues before we act. And look, this isn't just about huge historic disasters. It happens every single day on a smaller scale. We all know car crashes happen, but we don't think they'll happen to us. So in those critical seconds before an impact, our brain can just lock up, stuck in this state of disbelief that this is really happening. Okay, so this all sounds pretty bleak, I know. Our own brains are basically set up to fail us. But, and this is a big but, there's good news. You can actually rewire this.
you can learn to override that dangerous default setting. So here's the entire game plan in a nutshell. It's all about speed. The faster you can blast through that denial and deliberation phase, the faster you get to the decisive moment, where you can actually save yourself. And the secret to doing that? It's all about preparation. This is the official roadmap. And look at step 1, preparation. That's your secret weapon. By just acknowledging that something bad could happen and making a simple plan, you're giving your brain a script to follow. We're not talking about building a bunker here. We're talking about knowing the 2 closest exits at your office, having a family meeting spot, simple if-then plans. If the alarm goes off, then I grab my keys and I leave. It short-circuits that whole deliberation phase and lets you act instantly. And really, that's what it all comes down to. We know our brain is wired to hesitate. The only antidote is to prepare beforehand. When you make a plan, you're not just getting ready for a disaster. You're getting ready to outsmart your own brain. So what do you think? Is your plan ready to go?